Today I'm going to be showing you guys the different core nodes of N8N. These are the nodes that you're going to be using in every single automation that you build within N8N. So it's essential that you understand how they work and how you can leverage them for your own automations. So today we'll be going through different categories of the core nodes. We have triggers, flow control, data processing, integrations, debugging tools, and error handling. So to start with the triggers, we have the manual trigger. For the manual trigger, it's super simple. This trigger is mostly used for testing and for starting an automation. Usually when you get into a workflow, when you create one, N8N requires that you first start with a trigger. And so most of the times when you're building a workflow and you're not sure where it's going to go, you first just always use a manual trigger. Even if you do know where it's going to go and you do have a set plan, the manual trigger is just a really great node, because then you can test it, you can inject sample data, so that data that you want to play around with and mess with in that automation, the manual trigger is really great for that. Some example use cases, again, like testing API calls, debugging transformations, and running one-off workflows manually. Just really great trigger. The way you start this trigger is just at the bottom where it says execute sub workflow, that little like pinkish orangish button. You just click that and then it runs it. So really simple trigger to start off with. The second one that we have is a webhook trigger. Now this one's a little bit more complex, but it's really great also. This one starts a workflow when an external service sends out basically a signal to this webhook. So what a webhook is basically, you can think of it as like an antenna, right? It's always listening and trying to wait for a signal. And when you have some other service that's going to send data over a URL, the webhook is going to receive it because, like I said, it's an antenna. And once it receives it, then it's going to start the workflow with that data that it just received. So it's really great for automations where you need, for example, if you have a Google form, right, and you want the automation to start every time somebody submits a form, then webhook is what you're going to be using, because every time somebody submits a form, they're going to send, it's basically going to trigger a send off. And once it sends it off, it's going to send it off going to the URL within the webhook, and it's going to collect that data and start the automation. So example use cases, right? Capture form submissions, receive data from custom apps, and build instant automations. That's the other great thing about webhooks, is that they're instant. So immediately, as soon as once that data is sent over, it gets triggered immediately and goes. So it's better than a polling trigger where you are always constantly checking. Let's say every hour or every day, you're constantly checking, oh, is there new data? Oh, is there new data? This one's going to always get new data immediately as soon as it's inputted. So, for example, right here, right? This is what you're going to see when you open up the webhook. You have a test URL and a production URL. When you're going into production, you're going to click on production, and you're going to get this URL that you see here, copy it, and you're going to give it to that external service, or that external the external service that's going to be calling this webhook. That external service is going to take this URL and it's going to use it basically as a direction. It's going to say, okay, here's the address of the webhook. So every time it's going to send that data, it just uses that address and our webhook picks it up immediately. So it's a really, really great webhook trigger. It's great for instant automations that you want to get triggered immediately. Here you have the HTTP method, the path, authentication, response, and response time. You can do it for immediately or later. And that's a little bit more complicated when you get into the HTTP method. But usually when somebody is submitting a form, for example, you're going to change the HTTP method to from get to post. And that's just a whole nother video explaining how HTTP works and the different selections that you have within there. But there's plenty of videos on explaining how that works. Other than that, it's pretty simple. You usually don't have to worry about the path. Authentication is really on a case-by-case basis, and response is usually immediately. The schedule trigger is a really also simple trigger. This one, as the name says, it's going to be running on a schedule. So let's say you want to run it every Friday at 12 a.m. That's what you're going to use this trigger for that. You wanna run it every Monday, every few days, right? Every 2 days, every 3 days, then this is what you're gonna use. Or if you wanna run it like every once a week, again, this one, really great for that. And it even allows, if you see over here on the side, even allows for custom, what it says, custom cron. And so basically you can get really detailed with the exact schedule that you want. So if you want to specify down to the exact minute to the intervals, so every Monday and Wednesday at 3 a.m., that's you can use that code, and you can use ChatGPT to generate that expression for you. If you want to say, like I said, every Monday, Wednesday, 3 a.m., you want this schedule to work, then you would just go to ChatGPT, say, hey, uh, configure me a custom cron that's gonna work for the desired schedule. Gonna give you that little expression. You put it in there, and then that way um your your workflow, your automation is gonna get triggered based on those based on that expression. So it's really great for giving you complete control beyond the standard hourly or daily. So now going on to the next one, we have execute sub workflow. Now, this one is a bit twofold. This is a trigger, but it is also a way to call out for another workflow. Let me explain. So let's say you have your main automation that you're going. It has the different nodes, and then you want to basically call a different workflow, a different automation that you've created that's in a separate file. You would use this one. You would use execute sub workflow. And the reason why you want to use this and why it's so great is because this makes your automation more modular. So it's easier for testing and error handling. So you can separate tasks. For example, right? Let's say you want to build a newsletter, right? Okay. And you want to use AI to create that newsletter from web sources that it searches for, right? So your main automation would basically get those sources, right? And then you could send it off, execute sub workflow into a different automation. And within that automation, within that workflow, you would have the AI in there taking the data from the sources and then generating a newsletter. Then it would send that data back to you, back to this main workflow, and it would then continue down the process once it gets that data back. So again, if something goes wrong with the AI, workflow, then you could just go to that workflow and fix it over there without having to change the main workflow. And this is really a great solution for error handling and for making your automations a bit simpler and easier to manage, because as you can imagine, when workflows get so large, it gets really, really hard to build everything into one automation, into one workflow, because then you have a bunch of different data streams and lines going on, and it gets a bit of a headache. But if you just simplify it and offload some of that work into a separate workflow, then you can use this node to call out to that workflow whenever you need it. So again, it runs another workflow from inside the current workflow. It passes data into the sub workflow and receives output back, and lets you reuse logic instead of duplicating nodes. So here on the other side of that, right? So you want to execute another workflow. In order to execute that other workflow, you're going to want to start that workflow with this trigger, when executed by another workflow trigger. It's literally, that's what it's called. You can find it by searching execute sub workflow, and then you see triggers. It's going to say when executed by another workflow. You're going to click that, and this will be the trigger. And so when you have this as the main trigger, you won't need to activate the workflow, because it's always going to be activated. It's always going to be waiting for another workflow or for something else to basically call out to it and receive the data that it calls out to it. And once it gets started, it's going to go through the whole thing all the way to the very last node. And once the last node is completed, then it's going to send that data that that node has, and it's going to send it back to the main workflow. So that one, you kind of want to make sure that that last node contains all the data that you want or that you need for your for the other automation, the main automation that's calling out to this one. But like I said, if you want that a workflow to be triggered by another one, you're going to use this trigger when executed by another workflow. So here we move on to the loop node. Now, I personally use this node a lot, and it's really great for going over individual items. The way that N8N works is that it passes items in, and each item gets passed individually technically, but loop over items is really great if you want a whole set of logic to get executed with that one item, and then repeat that process for the next item. You can change the batch size from 1 to 2 to 3 to however many you need. And then once it finishes that process, it's going to loop over again, and it's going to start the next item, and it's going to start the next item, it's going to start the next item. For this one, we have the if node. So the if node is really simple, but it's also really great. Basically, it contains conditional logic that will send items onto a branch depending on what the result of that logic is. So for example, right, if you want to say, if an item equals something, the item is equal to 4, the number 4, right? That equals true, then it's going to get passed on to that branch. If it equals false, then it gets passed on to another branch. So it's a really great way to separate items, to verify items, and to separate items and send them onto different routes, right? If you maybe have a true branch and you're going to send that onto a specific route, or if you have a false branch, but you want that to get sent onto a separate route, then you can create different routes for the items. And again, if is just really conditional logic. That's all it is. And you can filter out invalid rows. You can filter out email leads, check for errors within an API, just whatever you need. Here within that if node, this is what you're going to see when you open it. You're going to see, like I said, the conditions. You're going to see the value is equal to this other value. And within here, where you see this is equal to, it's going to show you this little T. That means string. And so basically text. This is to process text data, but then you have different types, or you have a number, or you have date and time. You have Boolean, which is true or false, right? You have an array or an object. So depending on what the item is, depending on the kind of data that it is, what type of data it is, then you would switch it to its respective type, and then go create that logic and create that condition based on that logic. Now for the switch node, here, this is very similar to the if node, except it's even more broad, and it allows you to create even more branches depending on the conditional logic that you set. It's similar to the if node where you have conditional logic, but instead of just having only two options, like a true or false, this one allows you to switch the data, to switch the items into different data streams. And you can have multiple different outputs. And so if you want to have 5 different options, 5 different branches, 5 different routes, then this one is where you can go on. And you can set the logic to say, okay, if the item is this, send it on this route. If the item is this, send it on this route. It's just a really great way. And you can even name those routes right here, just as simple as 0 and 1, but you can rename the outputs to whatever. So you can say true, false, error, or failure, or queued, or whatever kind of labeling you need for your data. The switch node is great for that. And like I said, if you want to send the data onto the completely different routes, and it's going to be more than 2 routes, or if you just need a node that's a bit more flexible than the if node, the switch is really great for that. And like it says here, what it does, it's like a multi-condition if node. Here we have the code node. This is for the data processing part. Code node is probably, in my opinion, the most underused and undervalued node within all of N8N. It is a really incredible node that has basically unlimited flexibility. So here within this node, you can run JavaScript for full control of what you want to happen to the data that gets passed into it. So if you want to label data, right? If you want to group data, if you want to change the items and to manipulate the data and send out different items depending on the logic that you set within here, this node can do it for you. And within this node, you do need to write the JavaScript, but what I do a lot of times, even though I can write code and I do know how to code, it just takes way too much time. And so you can use ChatGPT, Claude, whatever AI agent you want to use to generate that code for you. So let's say you're getting data from different streams, right? You're getting data from Facebook, you're getting data from Google, and you want to normalize it. Then you can use code, you can use JavaScript, and it will take those data streams, normalize it so it gets organized exactly under the same fields, the same names, and that's going to output items that are identical to each other or have identical structure to each other. Really, whatever you could think of, whatever you need or want to happen to the data or would like to happen to the data, this node could most likely do it for you. And so it can even replace the function of other nodes. But right, it just depends on what you need. Even though it can be a little bit hard and tricky sometimes with the debugging, probably one of my favorite nodes, and it's just really great for you manipulating your data however which way you need. So example use cases, you can create a fully formatted file in HTML. You could create it like a downloadable file. You can tag data, you can clean data, you can generate payloads for API requests, whatever you need. The next one is the edit fields node. This is probably the simplest node within all of N8N. All it does is basically label data. So you can drag and drop data into this node, and basically you can label it, right? If you're scraping ads and say you get that data back, you want it to be labeled under Facebook, TikTok, Google, then you would grab that data and then just label it as a name, Google or Facebook, TikTok. And so it's a really simple node, but one thing you should know that makes it really useful is that you can group data together. So if you want the node to output a list of items along with other items that was collected from previous nodes, then you can drag those nodes and add that here so that you have a full, basically, repo of all that data. And some other example uses where you can add metadata, so you can add more data to the data that you already have. You can rename some of the keys if you want to do that. You can add timestamps, IDs, categories, whatever you'd like. Pretty great. So here, right, we have like mapping. You can pass in data here, and then you can name it. And within here too, within these two, you can add JavaScript data. Within you just have to have the two brackets. Yeah, two brackets, and then within there you can add data. So for example, if you wanted to label some item with the current date, then you can use JavaScript to grab today's current date, and then that would be the name, and it would make that label variable, because then say you ran it on a Monday, then it's going to give you Monday's date. But if you ran it on a Wednesday, it's going to give you Wednesday's date. There's a lot of flexibility there, and it just requires some creativity. And here in the middle where you see string, that's basically the data type. And so when you drag and drop right into here, it's automatically gonna automatically gonna go to the actual data type. So if you have an array, then it's gonna change it to array. If you have a string, that's gonna change it to a string. But if you're doing it manually here, then you can change it yourself. String, array, object, whatever you need. Over here, we have the merge node. This one's really great for merging different streams of data. So let's say you use the split node, right? Or the switch node. And the switch node, which sends items into different routes. Let's say you want those items to come back together after the logic conditions that they go through. Then you can have those items get basically attached to this merge. And what's going to happen is it's going to merge it into one stream of data. So as you can see here, we have 3 different streams of data coming in. We have input 1, input 2, and input 3. And basically what's going to happen is, right, going back to the ads example, say you have Facebook ads, Google ads, and TikTok ads, but they're all on separate routes. Then here, if you pass them all together, what's going to happen is that all the items are going to come into one stream, and then that can be helpful for whatever next step you need within your own workflow. It can combine the paths in different ways, right? We have append, we have wait for both, merge by key, pass through. It depends on a case by case basis. Many times in my cases, I think I use append, which basically means just it's gonna append each item one after the other after the other. Some example uses, like I said, merge scrape data plus metadata. You can join Google plus meta ads. You can compare two different data sets. Here we have HTTP request node. This is for integration. This one's a bit of a more advanced. This is the node that you're going to be using for API calls and API requests. It can connect to any API, and it supports get, post, put, patch, delete. It handles headers, authorization, authentication, and query parameters, form data, JSON, whatever you need. It's really great for that. And this is the node that makes N8N, honestly makes N8N special. We can connect to any service that has an API, and that's very broad, right? So you can connect to any single service, any single platform that has an API, you could connect to it. Most services have an API, which means you could connect to most services and you can request data. You can do whatever you need with the API. Also, outside of APIs, this is one way to scrape a web page. So if you sent out like a GET request and to a certain URL, like say you're trying to scrape a landscaping site, you put in that URL, you send a GET, it's gonna basically go to that URL and it's going to take that URL's data, that HTML file and whatever data they have within, and it's going to bring it back to you. So this is one way to set up a scraper, to build a scraper. Then N8N, you would be using this. Like it says here, you could pull data from government/industry APIs. You can integrate with applications that are not supported natively. What that means is that if a certain application doesn't have a node, right? Let's say Google didn't have a node here, right? It does, but let's say the Google Drive didn't have a node here, then you could use this API to call out to the Google Drive, and you would basically do that step manually, or at least you would do that step here, and you would basically build your own node, your own like Google Drive node. Here, when you open it, right, this is the URL that I was talking about. This is the method, so you can change this to get, put, post, whatever. Here you can add the authentication if it's needed. You can send query parameters, headers, and you can add parameters, options. Really, probably the node that brings the most value to us as automators and as consultants. This is what makes a lot of the magic happen. And finally, for the error trigger, so what it does is basically you could create a error workflow that works for any other workflow that fails. Let me explain. So you have, let's say here, right? You want to get notified anytime one of your workflows, one of your automations fail. Basically, you would put this you would create a new workflow, right? You would set this as a trigger, and then you can attach a Gmail node, and you would say, okay, send me an email when one of my automations fail. The automations that you want to be watching, the automation you want to be monitoring, you would go to the settings, and under there where it says error workflow, you would click and it would give you a drop down menu of all your workflows, and then you're going to add the workflow that you just created. So anytime that one workflow fails, anytime it fails, anytime anything goes wrong, this other workflow that you built, this error workflow, is then going to get triggered automatically, and then it's going to send you that email saying, hey, this workflow failed. So that's really great because then you don't have to necessarily you don't have to add that error handling within, or that error logic within that main workflow. Just the minute that it fails, you can configure it so that this other error workflow will automatically get triggered and send you a notification saying, hey, something failed. This is really great. Again, like I said, error handling. Anytime any of those other workflows fail, this will get triggered. But you have to first configure them to call out to this workflow when it fails. And like I said, let's say you go to main and you want it to call out to this anytime it fails. Like I said, you go to the settings, and in there you're gonna see error workflow or error trigger, I think. Yeah, I think it'll say error workflow. And under there, you're gonna have a drop-down menu. When you click it, you wanna click whatever you named this error workflow. And so that way, anytime it fails, it knows which workflow to call out to. Just for some recap, we have the trigger, the simplest trigger. This trigger is used for testing or for one-off runs. You just click execute workflow and the workflow execute. Here for the webhook, again, remember the antenna. This one's gonna be waiting to catch a signal. Anytime you use the production URL that it contains, it use that for send it to the service anytime it wants to send out data. If somebody submits a form or something happens and it gets triggered, it's gonna send that data through that URL, and this webhook's gonna catch it, grab that data, and then it's gonna proceed with the automation that you build. The schedule trigger, that just schedules your workflow on a, like I said, schedule every Monday, every Friday, every day, every 2 days, whatever you want. Over here, we have the execute sub workflow plus the trigger, right? So if you want to execute another workflow within this one main one, then you can use that. Again, makes the workflows more modular and easier to debug and handle. And then again, if you want a workflow to get triggered by another workflow, then you have to add that trigger that when executed by another workflow trigger. Over here, we have the loop. So if you want to loop over an item individually, if you want to send an item through a set of conditions individually, that's what the loop for. Well, that's what the loop is for. And it's going to keep doing that for all the items that it contains or that is sent to it. The if node is a simple conditional logic that will give you a true or false. So you can send items onto different branches. Switch node, again, it's like a multi-conditional logic node. It's basically the if node on steroids, and you can send that. You can create as many different branches as you want there. Over here, we have the code node. So basically, you can write JavaScript, and even now, I think you can write Python, but I think it's still on like beta. But what I use mostly is JavaScript. So you can write JavaScript, and that node can basically manipulate the data however you need or want. Over here, we have the edit fields, so labeling and organizing the data. And then we have the merge data. So if you have multiple streams, you can merge it into one stream of data. The HTTP request, great for calling APIs, great for scraping, whatever you might need. And the error trigger. The error trigger is for handling anytime a workflow fails or handling error logic for any workflow. So that's all I have for today. So if there's any more questions or I forgot to mention something, then you can drop your questions in the comment section and I'll be sure to answer you, whatever you guys need. So, all right. Thank you for your time.